Hey data peeps, this is Ethan, and today I'm going to be addressing data and its leverage, being able to leverage data, to get power out of it, and how we manage that. Um, so when I think about leveraging data, probably the first thing that comes to mind is you know you get those commercials, the more you know, um, or the old stuff from when I was a kid, from GI Joe, and now you know. And knowing is half the battle. Um, I think everybody knows, more information, more data gives you more power. But I think there's some particular synergies that can come, um, specifically when you can somehow get new combinations of data. I think that's where a lot of the data energy comes from, where a lot of leverage comes from, is finding ways to take insights, discoveries, and not only that, but just anytime that you can take something and combine it in a way that, or see it in a way, or cross-reference it in a way so that you can kind of create new data, right? So you create insights. It's this whole idea of 1 plus 1 equals much more than 2, and the power with that, I think a lot of times we leave to serendipity, and I think that's a travesty, because think about how many people the average person comes across in their life. I mean, between physical proximity, or especially with the internet now, if you're looking through search results, how many different people have been involved in collecting, amassing, being part of studies for that data. And then once you think about all that, and it's pretty awe-inspiring in some ways. In some ways it can be depressing when you think about how much energy is put into certain things. Like, you see certain groups of production, whether it's YouTube videos or movies or something, you're like, this much time and effort's gone into this genre. But anyway, so as humanity, we produce a lot of data, a lot of information, and it's not always quality, but there's a lot of really kind of interesting stuff. And if you can just kind of align them up, and I think one of the most telling things is like the enjoyment that we find as a culture that we get out of memes. So I think about like how memes evolve, and how they got that kind of they get that kind of hook in our mind, right? Like, you're able to take these disparate things and connect them, and they just become funnier, quirkier, or cringier, or something. They become more there's that way where you can just kind of get a lot more nuance packed into something as it evolves and combines and recombines. And I was just thinking about that with the what's the new song? I can't remember the artist. Anyway, I'll have to look it up later, but you get these all the time, right? Memes, songs, different things where you recombine, and you start listening, and you're thinking you're coming into one song, and another song pops up, and it's a new one. And sometimes it's taking some of the best parts of the old creation, and it's tweaking and adding on even better stuff, and you get real synergy out of that. And so how do we enable this, right? There's a lot of work that's been done around tweaking algorithms, and I've mentioned this in other episodes. A lot of that problem with the tweaking the algorithms is like the motivation is more improving clicks, improving dwell time on a video, or how many ads you end up showing, so you can bill for those ads, or somehow getting people hooked, having some addictive element, whether that's more on the sexualized, pornographic, or the food porn, or anything you can do, like kind of the whole Netflix brag, where they were like, we're fighting with sleep and we're winning. Very kind of parasitic stuff. But what I wanted to explore is like, how can we improve that synergy, get kind of a catalyst for data leverage without having to resort to things like that, to like dark patterns or kind of the darker side of human psychology. And I think a lot of it requires us to kind of, in many ways, fly in the face of human psychology. We have to some degree, say, certain things are just going to be off limits for this particular approach. I'm not saying we can't ever use human psychology, because I think there are virtuous ways to kind of, move things in good directions. But so for example, I was just using an LLM, and I was trying to get some basic information. And I realized this basic information had not been as neatly compiled for kind of one side of the political spectrum as it was for the other. But the resulting LLM response carried that overarching bias. So if there's a lot of people in society looking into one particular thing, and they've produced a lot of really good studies or statistics or whatever numbers, then your LLMs are going to be influenced by that, and it's going to be very easy to get to that data for one side, but then not for the other. And whenever you have things where there's a lot of motivation behind giving some particular image, and that predominates in the culture, that's going to show up in your LLMs. And even if you ask it and you keep inquiring and you kind of dig in, you've essentially, if you want to get to the data, the results you want, you basically have to learn how to use the LLM to create code, and then to run it, and then to scrape the data you want. And I know LLMs are developing, and maybe they'll get good enough to where they'll do that all on their own, if you have enough credits, or I don't know. Maybe at some point they will get good enough where they can do this. But as things stand presently, they are very kind of entrenched in whatever it is they've consumed. And I think a lot of the bias comes because of the way the models are, right? The way LLMs work, they kind of form these concepts based on what they've consumed. And so it's very kind of hard to filter through and get down to what you want. So again, getting back to the leverage of data and the serendipity, and bringing new points together. To bring new points goes back to what I discussed in one of my prior videos, is this atomicity, kind of a granularity you need. But aside from the granularity, you also need just a good way to kind of disambiguate a lot of stuff. That word disambiguate, if you've ever been to Wikipedia, if you go to a term, it'll have disambiguation. So like when search, you have a concept of term overloading, right? Where you can have the same term, or in programming, if you're using the same term but for different functions, it's really kind of a hard thing to get around in some ways. But and with LLMs, they have a better concept of things, and sometimes they get past that. But a lot of things are problematic too, because there's a lot of connections that are very easily made by the logic for LLMs and understanding human logic. But when you're talking about novel, new connections, at least in my experience with LLMs, maybe somebody else has had more experience with a more innovative LLM, and I'm not saying that I haven't got innovative perspectives out of what LLMs have produced. Far from it. I have gotten some interesting responses, and you can have some good dialogues with LLMs. But I think the real dynamism comes when you can completely strip away the intermediaries, when you don't have an LLM that you're depending on, what data was trained on, how much of what things were there, what distribution of results, so what's more likely to surface. And like I said, if somebody has gone through and synthesized a lot of data to produce that extra data for a given side, not for the other, the LLM is going to have that kind of bias built in, at least in my experience. And again, if any of you guys have seen anything that's better, I would love to see an LLM that had, this far more comprehensive, far more ready to kind of dig into stuff and contrive its own results and recognize that bias as it's doing that, so you don't have to, keep grilling it forever to kind of pick apart stuff. But if you had all of the data just as data, right? As you this stood out to me when I was watching this interview of the Doge team, and they're talking about how you had all these. I can't remember if it was Health and Human Services or one of the departments. They're pointing out that there was like, I think they were saying like hundreds of, and again I may have this wrong, but I'm pretty sure it was over 100 different chief information officers for a single department. I believe it was either Health and Human Services or FDA, I can't remember. But to think about like that's essentially the internet. That's everything. I mean, where there's so many silos, there's so many individuals, so much, and it's not just in this the duplication of labors, and that is an issue. But you need a way to be able to have far more leverage and control over the data, so that you can. That's what enables you to get kind of a next level, kind of 10x, or some orders of magnitude, I believe, breakthrough, and being able to make new connections to kind of reify these new, because as I said, a lot of this is bringing various diverse things together and being able to get in front of fresh eyes, or having enough fresh mind, and being able to kind of summon that data, but being able to not just summon the data, but be able to have a good audit trail and be able to quickly kind of filter through to what's needed. And so a lot of that dynamism is dependent on us getting kind of a common, I'd call it a meta schema. So in databases, you have schemas for organizing data, for kind of saying how data is related and what kind of rules should apply. And if you had this overarching, think of it like, with an alphabet, right? An alphabet gives you this great power because, especially a phonetic alphabet, because you can combine kind of a very fixed, limited set of tokens of letters, and it enables you to produce a big variety of sounds. It's kind of like the Lego of thought in some ways, because you can get all these diverse combinatory symbols using a very limited set. Because I think one of the big problems that there is with extracting this value from data right now is that and LLMs have helped a lot with this, and are helping, and I'm sure will help a lot in the future. But there's still so much friction for the common person to obtain the kind of leverage over data that someone like Elon Musk has, or any kind of big data scientist or big corporation that has its own, its own IT department, its own legal. It's got all these different forces that it can bring to bear against the data that it's consuming, that it's producing, that it's all the inquiries it makes. And so it gives this and this is something I want to address later on, but there's a very big asymmetric power held by the big boys, the major influencers, where they have money, or they have technical chops, or they have access to massive oceans of data, and people that can marshal that stuff still, even with LLMs, even with the democratization that's happened with so many things, they still have massively more power to see the world and understand it than the common person. And so to achieve that, it would be very useful if we all could have a revolution like we did with Johann Gutenberg when he invented movable type, right? Because before movable type, you had to people were just kind of you had manual rewriting of stuff. It was literacy wasn't anything but for the privileged. And this is kind of where my ideas and my dreams and my aspirations will probably end up running into problems and crashing into stuff, because so much of the present system is based on this asymmetric leverage and this overwhelming disparity between what can see, who can see, how much they can see, the ways in which they can share and control data, right? Think about this, right? Whenever you go to for any kind of transaction nowadays, back in the past there was a lot of haggling. You could haggle stuff, you could haggle terms of, not just on the money side, but terms of how you're going to do stuff with somebody. You'd hash it out. And I'm not saying I want to go back to haggling in the sense of you just have to hash out every detail with everybody. But I think there's a lot of cases where the individuals have far more power, but they're not able to kind of reify that power. They're not able to, that power's not able to manifest itself, one, because they don't realize how close that is within their reach. And on the other side, there's this asymmetry in the kind of, you go to a doctor's office or to a lawyer's or to anybody's, and they'll have you sign a waiver. And when have you ever been able to go to somebody and say hey, I've got this thing? It's always just very one-sided. The individual, very rarely. I mean, entrepreneurs certainly can be an exception to this, but it's very rarely that you have a place where the consumer is approaching the big box store or the hospital system or whatever big entity and saying, here are my terms. What do you think? And of course, it's really hard to do that because as an individual, you don't have access to a big legal team. You don't have a way to. And this drives me nuts, right? This is, I think, where a lot of the power disparity is rooted in our society, because they take advantage of these barriers to if you're wrong to buy a big entity, oftentimes you will end up far worse off by resisting than if you just sucked it up and took it. And so there's this prevailing oppressive current in our psyche and in the zeitgeist to just suffer as much as you can, right? You just put up with it. You put up, and that just builds and builds, and it makes people feel more and more disenfranchised, more and more frustrated. And I think at some point it can have really bad outcomes. I'm not advocating that anybody should do stuff that is illegal or hurting others or disregarding whether it's property or health or life. But there's really this big gap, chasm, and it needs to be brought back. I mean, think about the empowering feeling it was if around when YouTube came out, or Twitter, or just all these different aspects of the internet. They keep piece by piece kind of democratizing certain aspects of our society, and they've been transformational. I mean, hugely transformational in some ways, until they ended up getting, in many ways, kind of the system adapts, and in many ways things are kind of reined in, and people are kind of brought in line, become subservient to the dollars they need. And there's still power plays and struggles with that. But think about how much is still untapped. There's just so much untapped potential. And a lot of that is there for the taking for anyone that can figure out any way to really empower the individual to be able to, for example, one of the big things with this that I've been talking about, this leverage that they can have over us, a lot of that is not just what they have as far as, these overwhelming resources. A lot of it is the opacity that emerges from, you think about all the stuff that's going on with the government and Doge and, whatever side you're on in that. It'll probably be obvious at some point what side I am, but that's neither here nor there. But think about a lot of the power that the government has is the opacity in everything that happens. Like, even if you open up all the data, even if the data is all there, like you got all these CSV files and stuff, like there's no human around that could have the capacity to like quickly, look through that and say, well, what does this say about, this potential employer? Or what does this say about, this, the politician that's been in power for so long and whether or not I should vote for them, or about this organization, this government entity and what they've been doing, or anything. For each collective individual human to make that decision, it's not just, well, and what I was trying to get at is their insights to you, okay? I'm sorry I got distracted, but so that was really what I was trying to get at, is their insights that they can have on you relative to you to them. Like, again, it's that word I keep using, asymmetry. They have this massive chunk of stuff that they know about you. And not only do they have this massive chunk they know about you, but this massive chunk they know about the market. And you've got these tiny little peaks on them of, what they do, what they can do. And so oftentimes it would just very much simplify life if you could tell, is this company producing the product I want to buy? Is it even possible, this thing that I'm trying to get out of them? If I were to, if you feel like you've been aggrieved by somebody and you're contemplating suing them, how easy is it to access other people that have been aggrieved by them? How easy it is to, discover new information about them, to even know if it's worth, engaging all that effort. And if you could get all this data, so that'd be far easier. And I think a lot of this I've gotten kind of more into the combative side, but there's so much potential when it comes to the creative side. You just think about how many solutions are available for people's problems. I mean, so many people have so many problems, whether it's in your company, in your personal life, what have you. And imagine if somebody down the street has a solution or has the tools to, put together a solution. But there's all these barriers. And so many of the barriers I've seen across industry and markets, for example, has been that the people that have the solution are just in another universe. I mean, whether you're speaking to jargon or concepts or what have you. I've always loved, between going to Home Depot and craft stores, and you look at the variety of different things in the two different stores, and sewing stuff, and or even individual specialized, like a welding supply store or a plumbing supply store, and you get every store can have all these little things that are not available in a big box store, and a lot of times it's just ignorance as to what's available. But if you had a way to say I want something that fits these requirements and this, and I know that you can do some of this now with LLMs, but if you could just get right to the data, right? You could say, I need something that matches this profile or fits this shape or does this particular thing. And it was just there in the data. It was already reified in the data. And so it was as simple as, a filter and a search and And I think there's just a lot of potential, both between, finding solutions, whether they're products, whether they're ideas or concepts, whether it's data that people have access to. Maybe there's, somebody that has some hobby that observes some, artifact that's very useful, but the doctorate candidate that's studying whatever it is they're studying, they have no idea about this, and they either have to depend on serendipity, or if all the data was already there and they could just kind of query out, send this query. This gets back to the whole idea of basic, kind of an equivalent to an alphabet for us to get to data, because the leverage is there if we can create the tools for everybody that everybody can use. That you don't have to be some super smart, data scientist or be some very powerful businessman or politician that has access to, agency resources, or to, has a CIO and CTO that they can sit, and teams of developers they can stick on problems. But that's where I think the future is at with data and us as people, is the degree to which we can make data, we can leverage data and do that through being able to draw these connections that we can't do unless we have these kind of core, kind of a very basic library that we all, not library, but a kind of data alphabet, as it were.